All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. I am so glad that you are here because today we have an absolutely epic guest joining us. We have a woman who, quite simply, does it all. She is, first and foremost, a mother of four. She travels the country. She is vulnerable. She's real. She's authentic. She is a tech guru, although she doesn't own an iPhone. We'll cover that at another time. She puts up with Wisconsin weather, and today she's going to put up with me. Today we have Mandy Froehlich joining us. For those of you who have never spoken to her before, you might know her as Mandy Froehlich because that's what it looks like online. Mandy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And that was probably the best introduction I've ever had.
Well, see, it's authentic and it's real and there's nothing in there that wasn't truthful. So Mandy, other than that stuff I just shared, go ahead and introduce yourself to the world because you've got the entire world listening to you right now.
All right. Well, yes, it is Mandy Froehlich, Fraylick. That's what it sounds like. And actually, Froehlich in German means happy, which...
Wow. All right.
I don't know if that fits me or not, but, and I am a former director of innovation and technology. So I was an elementary teacher and then a tech integrator and then a director of tech. And I recently retired from that position. And right now I am consulting and authoring and speaking full time. So I travel quite a bit. And I'm also the director of author success for EduMatch Publishing. And I absolutely I love working with Sarah Thomas. She's one of my favorite people in the world. And then I do the BAM Radio Network Teacher's Aid and teach some adjunct classes. And that's pretty much what keeps me busy. So
I wasn't playing when I said you do it all. Literally, you do everything. You've got your hands in projects galore. And you said something that I think is intriguing to a lot of people, especially people that are looking at this right now. You said you retired. And for those people that are looking at this right now, they're saying, there is no way on earth she has retired. You're actually younger than me, and you retired, living the absolute dream in Wisconsin. Right? That's craziness. But so let's go back in time, though. You said you started off as an elementary teacher.
Correct.
Why? Why would you become an elementary teacher?
Well, my favorite story to tell, actually, and I tell this story in a lot of my, in my keynotes and some of my sessions and stuff, is that, like, I went to school to be an elementary teacher, but I'm licensed 1-8, and I never, ever wanted to work with middle schoolers. Like, I thought that they were nuts, honestly. Like, I just had absolutely no interest in it whatsoever.
As a middle school guy, you're completely accurate, but go ahead.
And I even went as far as to, instead of student teaching, I did an internship instead. So I had to apply for it and be hired because I wanted to avoid my middle school placement. Okay. So that's how important it was to me to not teach middle school. And when I applied for jobs, there were like 800 applicants to every one teaching position, particularly in elementary. The market was just flooded.
Right.
And so I went and I got offered a position. It was a 1-year limited term contract in middle school to teach cooking and sex ed. And so my
better than that.
It was like just feeding me to the wolves. And because I was the new teacher who didn't know any better, like I had no preps, they piled everything on me. And I had no experience in middle school, so I didn't even know what I was supposed to have. And but I loved it. I ended up after that year, I would have continued teaching middle school if I could have. Unfortunately, my licensure, my minor didn't allow me to teach anything in middle school because the content was communications, which isn't taught in middle school. But I absolutely loved it. I loved the kids. I loved how they were both wanted to be grown up sometimes, but wanted to be little kids sometimes. And it was a really great experience of, learning the necessity for relationships and those kinds of things. So unfortunately I would have stayed in middle school, but I couldn't. And I needed to go to elementary, which I loved as well. So it was good.
Yeah. That story. Yeah. I know you a little bit here. offline, but it's kind of symbolic for your life. Kind of just get thrown into things and you're like, I guess I'll figure it out, you know. And you do. So just so people can understand this trajectory for the last 20 years of your life. Start off middle school cooking and sex ed.
Yep.
Then you work as a tech director, and now you spend a lot of time doing stuff with mental health. I mean, it's just like, what? Is it just because you're an expert on all things, or is it different seasons of your life bring out different parts of you?
What is that? Is it jack of all trades, master of none?
Yeah,
I feel like I fall more into that category. Yeah, so the reason actually that I ended up in tech, that I went from being a teacher to a tech integrator to a tech director, wasn't so much that I loved technology so much, is that it was that I got burnt out as an elementary teacher and I needed something different. So it actually wasn't a change of like passion, it was a change out of necessity. Because at the time when I became burnt out, I didn't know what else to do. And the only thing that I could think of doing was to change my position. The reason that I went into tech is because I liked it and I was good at it. I wasn't afraid to press buttons. I wasn't afraid to, turn things off and then turn them
You're
back
not
on.
afraid to push buttons? No.
I have been told that so many times in my life. I push everybody's buttons. But so it was actually out of that necessity of becoming burnt out that I switched into tech. When I was a tech integrator, I had always, like, prior to that, I'd actually wanted to be a principal. And so administration from the tech integrator position just seemed like the natural choice. And so I went into the tech director. And there were pieces of it that I really liked, but the mental health focus is a combination of a lot of things. It was a combination of a discussion I had with Tara Martin one time when we were talking about our childhoods and how that affected us into our adulthood and working with students. It was partnered with a conversation I had with a friend of mine who was a paraprofessional in the school where she had gotten bit to the point where it was bleeding, and she had to go to the hospital and get that whatever shot it is that you have to get for that. And when I asked her to show it to me, she pushed her sleeves up and she had bruises all up and down her arms. And I thought that I thought her husband was abusing her, is what I thought it was. And when I asked her what happened, she told me that all of the marks on her arms that I could see, and others obviously that I couldn't, were the result of students hitting her. Wow. And she was an elementary paraprofessional. So I started to think about, and I'd gone to the district at the time and said that, something needs to be done. This isn't right. This can't continue. And my concern was of her mental health in coming to school, being afraid of the kids every single day. And a lot of people don't like it when I push at this because I think it makes them feel uncomfortable, but I know some of our kids can't help it. I do get that part of it, but like, abuse is still abuse regardless of who's doing it. So if you want to talk about somebody who's going to school every day and they are being abused by kids, that's still abuse, and we still need to do something about it. And it makes people feel uncomfortable because the kids can't help it, and I get that. But we need to provide more support as a district entity to these people and to the kids, not only in behavioral practices and things like that, but also just more people, more support, people you can tag team with and get out of situations and stuff like that. So that was a big push of mine. And then just dealing with my own mental health and burnout and watching the teachers around me start to show some of the same symptoms that I did as a teacher when I started to get burnt out. And I do talk about it in my session, The Show Must Go On, that, we have people that leave. We have a high attrition rate in education, but we don't actually count the people who want to leave and can't. And so there's a lot of people that burn out, and you know, they would prefer to leave the profession, and possibly in the state that they're in, they should, but they can't because they have bills to pay and they have kids to put through college and all of those types of things. And so we have this huge group of people who are burnt out and who have to stay. And so how do we help them re-engage?
Wow, it's a powerful story, and I don't want to necessarily take listeners and viewers back to other episodes, but I interviewed somebody by the name of Jessica Gentry recently, who she went viral on social media. She was an elementary teacher for 12 years, and then last June just decided to hang it all up and say, I'm done. She was just completely burnt out and fried. And I can't tell you how many other people I've spoken to recently who have expressed the same thing. And we talk about the teacher shortage and the fact that we cannot find quality people to fill all of these voids. And we oftentimes just try to look for the quick fix and say, it's just 'cause they're not getting paid enough. It's because teaching is just not attractive anymore. But there's so much more to it than that. And I applaud you for being a person that truly practices what they preach. You don't just get up on the stage and paint these platitudes, but you live it, you breathe it, you understand it, and you can relate to people in a very real way. I want to ask you about the idea of, you know, jokingly I talked about pushing buttons, and you said that people say that to you all the time, but you're definitely somebody who is a straight shooter. You call it like you see it. And I know in education, you said you spoke up with the district in regards to this other teacher who had bruises and abuse. How do you determine when to speak up and when to step out? How do you determine that hill to die on, if it's appropriate to, or if it's not appropriate? Whether you want to talk about this personally from your own life or just advice for others, if you have any.
It's a really good question. I don't know if I have the answer to that. I feel like I was recently talking to a friend of mine just last week, and I was discussing my kind of disgust at something that hadn't gone my way, you know. And he said to me something really interesting that's kind of, I've been kicking around in my head. And he said, Mandy, he's like, you are a fighter. He's like, and not everybody is a fighter. He's like, and you have to understand that. And in my brain, when I roll that around, I think, I don't feel like I do. Like I don't have to accept that. Like we need more people like that who are willing to go to bat for things that they believe in, because it is so much easier not to. Right. It's so much easier to sit back and just let it slide. Like I get that. And, you know, I don't know if I guess the things that I kind of live and die on the hill for, or whatever. Mm-hmm. People go on the hills, I guess, for that stuff. I don't know. What that
so many metaphors being thrown out here today. Just talk. Don't try to interpret me.
Riding a bike on the hill, like what am I doing on the hill? Anyway, it's beside the point. I tried to, so I had worked really, really hard my career, the last few years at least, to develop my core beliefs. And my core beliefs lead to my purpose. And my purpose is, I believe in supporting teachers, because when we support teachers, we best support students. The things that I go to bat for fall within those core beliefs and that purpose. Mm-hmm. And so it's also the area where if things are, you know, I can handle any kind of burnout that comes my way or stuff like that, because I live within that core beliefs and purpose. It also, like, living within your purpose also means that sometimes you make unexpected changes because you know, your core beliefs or your purpose are being challenged. But the whole idea of fighting for things, a lot of times I'll get it where people will actually come to me to fight for them, which in some ways is a little irritating, honestly, because I want them to do it themselves. Sure. And in some ways it's humbling, because it means they trust me to do it, you know? Yeah. But it's never easy, and it always comes with additional stress and anxiety. But in the end, I feel like it's just that kind of, I guess maybe it's a platitude, I don't know. I feel like if I'm making a difference, it's worth it. So, I'm gonna give an example. So I had in a district I was in, they chose to cut all professional development. Now, I'm not just saying professional development like they're sending people to conferences. I'm saying professional development like any kind of additional learning for teachers. Hmm. Now, one of my core beliefs is that we need to teach people the things we ask them to do. And I often think that we ask teachers to do a whole bunch of things that we're like, well, figure it out. Mm-hmm. And that causes additional stress and kind of heartache, actually. And so I chose to go to bat for the learning, the professional learning, because when I bounced that off my core belief and my purpose, it didn't match. So that's how I chose to go to bat for that particular thing that was happening. So I guess if I had to give advice, it would be figure out what your core beliefs and your purpose are. Live within those. Choose to do the hard things because not everybody else is going to choose to do them. And, sometimes in order to create change, you have to tick people off.
True story.
It's just the way it is. So
I think it's a powerful story, and it's a real story too. It's not just rooted in theory. This is the Mandy story, and I think that's where the magic in this exchange is. There are some people, I'm a former building administrator, and I can remember those people who, no matter what the initiative was, had something to complain about, always had something to gripe about, and eventually they turned into like Charlie Brown's teacher for me, which is wah, wah, wah. I always knew they were going to have something to complain about. Mm-hmm. So their words just became noise because it was tough to articulate what their core belief was. Their core belief was simply, I'm going to piss off Dave every chance I can. Mm-hmm. And as opposed to, I have a cause, I have a purpose, I have a reason for what I'm saying. And I think that's so huge. And I love how you articulate the idea that each of us individually have to come up with our own metaphorical hill. We have to determine what our core beliefs are. You didn't say, here are the 4 beliefs, and these are the 4 things worth fighting. You were able to identify your own 4. And again, you've taken it to heart where it's not, you're not fighting for Mandy. You're fighting for causes, which is so cool because there are some that would look at fighting to the point where, you fight internally, and if that doesn't work, you go elsewhere as selfish. I go back to Jessica Gentry, who decided to leave the profession, and she was crucified online and seen as being selfish, just worried about herself as opposed to taking care of the kids and taking care of the district first. But it's not selfish if you're fighting for a cause, if you're fighting for a purpose. And your purpose was you want teachers to continue to be supported and to grow. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think too that when you develop core beliefs and a purpose, it's not exclusionary. Like I don't focus on teachers because I don't want to focus on students, or I don't think that they're important, and I always say too that when I say teachers, like I mean administrators as well. I absolutely became burnt out as an administrator. It's freaking hard. And so I'm not saying that I don't believe that kids should be supported. It's just that for me and my own purpose, I believe that when we do support adults, we are also supporting kids. And as far as Jessica goes, like who is anyone to say that her choice was right or wrong for her?
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, why are teachers looked at as martyrs who just need to throw themselves to the wolves in order to do what's best for everybody else? That's crap. People who are in teaching and in education, they deserve to be happy in their professions too. We have the option of being in one of what could be the happiest professions there is. Like we work with kids. Kids are cute and they say funny things and they do funny things. Like it could be super happy, but there's so much else going on all the time. And if it's not making you happy, get out. Either fix it, be happy, decide to be happy and fix it, or if it's better for you not to be, don't. where it's nobody else's business to decide what people should and should not be doing when it comes to their own mental health and happiness.
Right.
And I know who you're referencing and you know the situation that you're referencing, but I certainly hold no judgment as to what she decided to do.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting nuggets in this, and I think so. I'm an administrator. I was a building administrator. I'm a central office administrator, and I think that at times people like me make statements that have inadvertent consequences. For example, we make the statement, "I will always do what's best for kids," which is an amazing platitude. It is something we need to focus on. But again, it's not exclusionary. That doesn't mean I'm only going to do what's best for kids at the expense of the adults. I think oftentimes we use that statement not to drive what we're going to do, but to excuse what we've done. We say, I'm going to screw with teachers. I'm going to completely ruin their lives, and teaching is going to have to consume 24/7. And I'm guilty of this. I can tell you flat out, as a principal, I was the guy that I expected the world from my teachers. And I would always excuse it by saying, well, it's best for kids though, right? And then I wouldn't understand when teachers would get burnt out. I wouldn't understand why teachers would say no or push back. Because we lose sight of the fact that if we are truly focused on what's best for kids, we've got to pour our hearts and souls into the teachers because they're the difference makers, not us.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
So let me ask you the same question, but through a slightly different lens, if that's okay.
Sure.
You're a mom of 4, and that's a balancing act. And I know at times as a mom of 4, it can be difficult to balance the needs of Mandy versus the needs of kids as mom. And I know that that's a struggle at times for anybody. I'm a father of 4 and trying to make decisions as to what's best for me versus what's best for my kids. Man, that's a slippery slope, you know? Do you have to define your core beliefs as Mandy as well? When you're determining how to serve your kids and how to be there as mom for them and how to give yourself time and space, and how does that work?
Well, the interesting thing I think about being an educator is that the overlap between your personal and professional is so, they're so ingrained in each other that it's hard to make, it's hard to kind of separate that. There are a lot of times where, the things that my kids go through at school challenge my core beliefs.
Right.
And I have to decide what piece of that I'm going to take on. It doesn't mean I go to battle for my kids all the time, but it does mean that I work really hard on teaching them how to advocate for themselves as students. And so that piece of it does overlap. As far as like the self-care piece of it,
yeah,
I feel like as I've gotten older, it's actually gotten easier. Like my kids now are 20, 18, 16, and 13. So they're a little bit more like tour out of the house, even though they still need me just as much. Like, don't be fooled that once your kids go to college, they don't need you. They absolutely do. But when they were younger and I had the 4, I was working full time, getting my master's degrees and also driving them to their football and their basketball and their baseball and their dance and all of those kinds of things. And I don't have to do that anymore. Like 3/4 of them have their license. So in that way, it has freed up some time for me to be able to focus on myself, because for years I didn't. And I definitely think that was part of why I burned out as an elementary teacher, because when I burnt out, it was at that time. My kids were in all the sports and all the activities, and I went from one master's degree, I went from my bachelor's to master's to master's. Like I was in school, I joked, for like 19 straight years. And it was during that time that was when I actually burnt out. So I think it's so important, and self-care is so tough because there are different dimensions of self-care. Like you have to make sure that you're doing the 4 that I always talk about are emotional, intellectual, physical, and spiritual. So there's 4 different kinds of self-care, and you have to make sure that you're hitting all of them. And then you have to make sure that you're taking care of your kids, and you have to make sure that you're taking care of your students, and you have to make sure, And so self-care is usually the first thing to go. But that being said, I think it is the most important thing to make sure that you don't burn out and have some sort of mental health issue that you have to start dealing with, because in the long run, that takes a lot more time. So self-care is really about, it's kind of like the idea of preventative medicine. It's the things that you have to do in order to not get sick down the road.
Mm-hmm. I'm sitting here taking notes because you're preaching to me right now. I don't know if you realize that or not, but this is a free therapy session, so I appreciate it. I'll just talk a little bit about myself and my own struggles. And I've told many people this story before, but my oldest son is 13. Your youngest is 13, but my oldest is 13. So I'm just getting to that phase. And a lot of my exhaustion, a lot of my own burnout has been self-inflicted. I mean, my 13-year-old, for example, couldn't tie his shoes till he was 8. Why? Because daddy would always do it for him. He would just come to me, throw his foot out there, and I would sit down and tie his shoes. And I got myself to the expectation that whatever little need my kids had, it was my responsibility to take care of it. If they needed a second helping of dinner, it was daddy's responsibility to go scoop it up. I mean, every little thing. I had to be there to tuck them in every single night. I have to read them their 2 stories. I have to say the specific ritual every single night. Sweet dreams, keep your covers on, good night, I love you, before anybody can go to bed. Like, I put it on myself as though I am all important and all needed. Otherwise, my kids can't survive and thrive. And I think oftentimes in schools, we do the same thing as teachers and as administrators. We own it all, and we say it's my responsibility to fix everybody, and then get ourselves to this point where eventually we just throw our hands up in the air and say, I can't anymore. I'm done. I give up. My coping mechanism for 21 years has been a pot of coffee a day, and then like a 6-pack of beer every night. I mean, that's hyperbole a little bit, but that's the reality. It's because the stuff that happens in between is exhausting. It's completely exhausting. So give me some hope.
Well, think about what you just said, though. So this is the part where when you start to talk about mental health and everything that overlaps, I'm just going to go ahead and diagnose you right now with all of my medical background. But you needing to do that for your kids is more about your needs than it is theirs, right? And I think you could say this as a blanket statement. I think teachers in general have that feeling of wanting to be needed, right? I think that particularly in elementary school, maybe not in secondary so much, but particularly in elementary school, and the kids are little, you have that feeling you want to be needed. And that is more about you than it is about them, because when you're teaching them to be individuals and to be, on their own and to be able to do things like learning to tie your shoes, that's kind of a rite of passage. Like that's an accomplishment that makes you happy. And as long as you're doing that for them, you're taking that accomplishment away. And so I think that that's kind of the same thing in teaching. And for all of the areas that I have weaknesses with my own kids, that was actually a strength of mine, is saying, nope, you have to try and do it first. If you can't, then I will. And I was like that with my students as well. And so our classroom ran fairly smoothly because everybody had jobs and had things to do, and they all knew what was expected of them. And it wasn't that I was never there to quote unquote save them if they really needed it, but they did need to try on their own first. And I do think that a lot of the issues that we actually bring to the classroom have to do with our own needs than it has to do with our actual students' needs. And even when it feels like in this case in particular, our own needs feel like something that would be kind to students because it's, well, we need to do everything for you, we're making your life easier. You're really not in the long run, and they're not, not getting those things that they need. So I think that's I think that when you talk about mental health and where some of our own issues are, I think we're definitely bringing those into the classroom all the time. And they're not always detrimental to the kids, and they're not always going to hurt anybody. But they are something that if we're paying attention to what we're doing would be something that would, we would be able to kind of work on and fix. So
I'm fighting so hard not to just continue to make this all about me. So when we're done recording, it will be all about me, because obviously that is definitely my need, and I need you to fix me. But I'm hoping other people that are resonating with this are going to say, oh man, I need to reach out to her so she can diagnose and cure me. Um, I want to talk about something. You keep throwing out these words, mental health. And right now they are in vogue. A lot of people want to start talking about mental health. Yep. And some people are talking about it because it's simply the topic of the day. It's the new buzzword. It's like differentiation and formative assessment and PLCs. It's whatever everybody's talking about right now. So everybody's throwing out mental health. Yep. But I love how you use it just in conversation. I think some people right now are using mental health as though it's our attempt to save kids from doing dangerous, hurtful things in schools. And some people are using it almost as a badge of honor when they can start talking about their own mental health. You know, and think about, you just brought out some vulnerability in me. And we've been talking here on, I don't even know how long this podcast has been going on, but I'm already starting to open up to you. And vulnerability, I'm going to talk about a blog post that you just wrote. Vulnerability at times can be seen as a weapon, right? Some people use it to try to validate themselves and to excuse what they're doing. And some people use their own vulnerability and mental health as an excuse. And some people use it to hurt other people once they've been vulnerable and real. Talk to me about why you think so many people are misusing such an important topic, and they're not just addressing it, just and having real conversations about it. Why is it this mystical thing that people are using almost like a sword?
Well, I think that some people have a really hard time, and I've even seen this in, so the grad course that I teach right now is an educational technology course for aspiring principals and directors of curriculum. So one of the things that I have hit hard on in this course is vulnerability, and we've actually read Brene Brown's Dare to Lead together and stuff like that. And I joked with them and I said, I bet you didn't think you were going to come into a technology course and talk about all the feels, you know, like. That's just not normally something you do. But I said, but I can guarantee you that if you don't set up the right climate and culture as a leader, nobody's being innovative. Nobody is. Like if you're dealing with disengagement or mental health or vulnerability issues or whatever it is, people are way too busy thinking about that to ever think about technology. So we talked a lot about that. And one of the things that one person said to me that I feel like was probably a pretty common thought between everybody was that they felt like vulnerability equaled weakness. And we, you know, vulnerability in itself, you know, is kind of that idea of like an Achilles heel. Like where can I find your weak spot? Like in the terms of war, conflict, or whatever it is, I'm looking for your weak spot so I can attack, right? And that's kind of how it's always been used. But vulnerability goes a lot with being authentic. And that is scary as hell, because if you're authentic and somebody doesn't like it, or somebody puts up their own walls against it, or somebody won't reciprocate that, like how does that feel after? It feels bad and it feels awkward. And, you know, like you put yourself out there to make a connection and somebody else kind of refuted that connection. And so it is really difficult to be vulnerable. Now, that being said, I think I've been vulnerable all my life. Like I was vulnerable before being vulnerable was cool. Like I've always been that same way. And I don't know if it's from the trauma in my childhood. I'm not really sure what it is. But I've just always been that way. And so I don't know how to not be vulnerable, which means that through the course of my life, there have been people who don't understand that, who have then kind of flipped it over and used it against me. So one example I can give is I had an amazing principal. She was so good, like loved her. But if I asked too many questions, she started to treat me like I didn't know, like I wasn't competent.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening is that I stopped asking her questions, which probably it's a natural reaction, but probably not the right reaction. I should have continued to model that vulnerability. And so that's one way, you know, that's one example that I can give where somebody has actually used that against me to make me feel a negative emotion in reaction to my vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And in the blog post, as I said, you know, like we can, it's again, easier to shut down. It's easier to armor up. It's easier to think, well, if they're not going to do it, I'm not going to do it, or that really hurt. And now I have wounds where I didn't have them before and I need to go, you know, crawl someplace and lick them and all that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is that people who create change, like true change agents, continue to do it even when it's hard. Like that's what makes you a change agent.
Right.
Making you a change agent isn't, or you being a change agent isn't the idea of going out and trying some new tech or, you know, talking about SEL. Like that's not a change agent. A change agent is a person who keeps going even when it gets really, really flippin' hard and you don't want to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the same thing with vulnerability. Like when it's hard and you're still modeling it, and it's like there's pieces that you feel like you're just like, the vulnerability is just like dying inside because you're like, why is this not working? Like, why is this happening the way it is? Like, those are the moments where you have to keep going. I started doing this workout challenge, and it's like videos and stuff like that. And the girl who does the videos, she always says, you need to do the hard things. You need to do the hard things. You need to do the hard things. She says it like 1,000,000 times. And when it really sucks and I want to stop doing the freaking plank I've been doing for what feels like 100 years, she says, you have to do the hard things. I'm like, okay, I can do the hard things. And it's kind of the same idea, you know, when it gets hard, like you can do the hard things. If we don't have people who are doing the hard things, like being vulnerable and showing that because other people are treating us a certain way, it's never going to get any better.
So good. I wish you could see my notes right now. I mean, they're insane. My office is going to be littered with Mandyisms. Like everywhere I look, it's going to be Mandy said. But it's so good. You know, can I interrupt you real quick? I just want to highlight a couple of things that you just said. Number one, that being vulnerable is not the opposite of being confident. I think that anybody that's listening to this and watching this would describe you as extremely confident, that you have swagger about you, but yet you're also vulnerable. Well, at least that's how you present yourself. But that vulnerability is really just being authentic. And it's not necessarily even being successful at doing hard things. It's admitting that some things are hard. Yes. You know, I think oftentimes that arrogance comes when you pretend like everything just comes easy to you. Mm-hmm. But being authentic is admitting that some things are hard and that you are still willing to try. And that's where the confidence comes from, is your persistence and willing to push through some things. You know, recently I was having a conversation with somebody and they asked yet another in vogue question of describe your biggest failure. And I jokingly said, man, how do I figure out one? But I think my biggest failure has been labeling myself as a failure, taking individual moments of setback and using that to identify my entire being. And that's something we're really good at in education. We take teachers and we throw a label on them. They're effective or highly effective or ineffective, although there's individual points in the practice. We do the same thing with kids. Yep. If it is an honor roll student or they're an at-risk student, we just throw these labels around on people all the time. Mm-hmm. I would even use the idea of talking mental health. We'll call people mentally ill or mentally challenged or whatever the case may be. We throw these labels on people that become their identity, as opposed to recognizing that we're all somewhere on our journey. We're all progressing towards something, and life is hard. And if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're saying, no, it's not, well, then you're not doing anything with yourself. I'm just going to put it out there right now. Life needs to be hard, or you're not growing. Exactly. Yeah, that's so sweet. Enjoy your little cocktail on the beach. But life, if you're doing it well, is hard. Mm-hmm. So where you're at right now in your journey, okay, you've gone through quite a bit of change recently. Quite a bit of transition. You're on the road like crazy right now. You're out there speaking to people all over the place. Where are you in your journey?
Well, I want to go back just a second to kind of something what you said with the vulnerability thing. I think one of the things that people so I think fear is a big thing that holds people back, right?
Yeah.
And for fear in particular, I think is a really, really interesting topic because it's so held tight to vulnerability and courage, right? So like if kind of like a lot of things that we've said, like if you are a fighter and you are a change agent and you are vulnerable and somebody throws stuff back at you, that's going to help you create courage, but that doesn't mean you don't have fear.
Yeah.
And so the one thing about fear that I think is important is that you can't tell somebody to get over a fear. We do this a lot. We say you need to get over your fears. You don't ever sometimes get over fears. So if we say you need to get over fears and you never get over it, you're never going to move forward because you're like, well, I can't do that because I'm afraid. Mm-hmm. There are two things that I've done that I've had to work through fear. The first is, and people always laugh at me when I say these two things, but I swear to God, it's true. I have a huge fear of public speaking, Like I can't, when I didn't talk to people when I was in school, like when I was in elementary school, I hated talking to people. I didn't like talking to adults. I didn't like talking to kids. I was very, very quiet. And when I got into high school and I started to talk to people more, I had a teacher who told me, and I kid you not, he said, after doing a mock trial, that I was very good at arguing with people. You know, that whole push buttons thing?
There you go.
Started in high school. So I decided from there that I originally had wanted to go into law. And so I thought, well, it doesn't really matter what I do. I'm going to have to talk in front of people. And so I took every course imaginable in college. That's why my minor is communications. I took every course I could to be able to talk in front of people. Mm-hmm. It wasn't about getting over my fear. And if you ever watch me before I speak, I put my hands behind my back or on my hips so that I don't wring them because it's a nervous habit. I go to the bathroom first to take some deep breaths alone and not have anybody talking to me, because if you're a speaker, usually people are talking to you. And I have to kind of get into a zone, and I will be shaking like a leaf until the second I get on stage. And it's not that I have ever gotten over my public speaking fear. It's that, I've kind of like, I acknowledge the fear, like, yep, I know you're there. I can see you, and you need to go sit in the corner right now where I finish what I'm supposed to do and live within that purpose. And then if you want, you can come back when I'm done. But it's that. And then the other thing is, like, I'm a terrible writer. I'm a god awful writer. I've had to work really, really hard at it. And I've written 2 books and I write a blog and all those things. And yep, I get that I do it. It doesn't mean that I'm not afraid every single time I put something out, because I know my grammar is awful. I know I put so many commas in that it's ridiculous. Like, they're go way overboard on commas. I know all this. And I am afraid that somebody's going to call me out on it one day and just be like, oh my God, seriously, you write books. Can you just take a grammar class? But I do it anyway. And I do it so that I am living within that purpose. And so, it's to tell people to get over their fears. Like, we're not helping anybody to do that, to tell them to do that. And I think that that's a piece of being vulnerable, right? Is having those fears.
See, and I don't know if you can see me right now, but like I'm seriously like getting misty-eyed right now, because you are.
I usually make people cry. Like, that's pretty.
It's what you do.
Common. But like, oh shoot.
But they're not like sad tears. They're, so we're having this conversation about vulnerability and weakness and overcoming fears, but you're doing it in such a way that it's so uplifting. It's almost not that misery loves company, not that sense, but it's an empowerment. It's okay. Hey, we can do this. You can go out there and you can continue to live and find success in your life. I mean, you're not just dabbling in these things. You're out there and you're killing it, pushing through fear, pushing through what you perceive as your weakness. But sometimes your weakness also becomes your greatest strength. We've heard before, somebody's greatest strength can become their greatest weakness. But I think you're exemplifying the exact opposite of that. that you saw these things as your weakness, and your willingness to embrace those and own them has become your superpower. And it's uplifting and inspiring to me, specifically, let alone everybody else that's listening. And I mean, I appreciate that because it's real. It's just, it is you being you and saying, I am who I am. And it's not a willingness and a complacency just to say, embrace who I am or screw you. It's, here's who I am today. It's better than who I was yesterday. It's not who I'm going to be in the future, but it's who I am today. And I want you to come along for the ride with me. And it's so refreshing to hear. It really is.
Oh, thanks.
Absolutely. So you talk about writing books, you speak, you travel, you blog, you work with EduMatch, you still play around with technology all the time. You're doing it all. And I know that you would be humble and say, but you're still learning and you're still growing and all these things, but you've got a lot of wisdom and a lot of truth. So I'm going to give you the same opportunity that I give everybody that appears on this podcast. You're going to get 30 seconds now to bring Mandy truth. So although I'm going to have Mandyisms all over my office, I'm going to have one that's right above my computer that I look at all the time. Okay.
And this is your opportunity. Oh my gosh, the pressure.
Right? This is your opportunity. So there are 7 billion people on the planet. They're all tuning in right now because you're on. Okay. So don't laugh. That's not the time to laugh. Wrong placement of the laugh. I want you to imagine that they're all listening to you. Okay. Even in that cute little Wisconsin accent. What do you need them to know? Drop the Mandy truth right now. Go for it.
Okay. So I think where I would go is actually a place I was thinking of this morning. So I do a lot of blog posts on a lot of these things, like being vulnerable and fear. And I have a really popular blog post a lot of people have read on forgiveness, and how forgiveness is really about yourself and letting go of somebody else's, somebody else in your life that is just going to, that's really about helping you move on and not allowing someone to have control. So I talk about these things a lot and what they mean and what forgiveness means, that it's not letting somebody off a hook, and it's not just, allowing somebody to continue to do what they're doing. All of those things I talk about: depression, anxiety, mental health issues, forgiveness, fear, vulnerability, empathy. None of them are easy. And to get to a place where you are comfortable with them, even to get to the place where you're comfortable with them, not necessarily even good at them, is really, really hard. And sometimes it sucks. And sometimes you're feel like you're fighting an uphill battle, and that you're never going to get to the place where you want to get to. But all of those things are, the humanity of all of that is what is the most important part to have, not only in our personal lives, but also in education. And so all of those things are worth it. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about what you decide to fight for, those are the things to fight for. The hard things are always the things to fight for. And I think that, when you start to look at some of those pieces, when I talk about putting fear in the corner, it is a freaking lifelong battle to continue to do that. It doesn't happen in a day. And I don't know if you ever get really good at it, but you can definitely keep working and get better. So I guess that would be my 30-second mic drop, would just be that shit is hard. It just is.
So I'm probably not putting that quote above my computer, but I'll put it in my wallet, so I look at it every time I pull out some money. That's good. That is so good. So good. Normally I try to sum it all up, but I think you just did it with those 3 words. So if you forget about it, people, stuff is hard. Or use Mandy's words, because it's definitely more appropriate. So Mandy, you are an absolute rock star at life. You are an incredible educator, leader, author, speaker, all that stuff. But you're an awesome person, and I appreciate you taking time today to share so much truth with all of us.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.